This is a story that I've been wanting to make for ages. It's a proper old-school London mystery. And like all good London mysteries, it takes place in Whitechapel. But this isn't the Jack the Ripper story. This is something completely different. It's the tale of the man who never slept. Our story begins in Whitechapel in 1869. The neighborhood was, to put it mildly, rough. It was poor, overcrowded, and dirty. And like other poor, overcrowded, and dirty neighborhoods, it had its fair share of crime. In the space of just 3 months, there were at least 6 similar robberies in the area. Nothing was left behind, and no witnesses came forward. Each time the locals assumed that it must have been an inside job, that someone they trusted had betrayed them and let the burglar in while they were asleep. As he raced towards the commotion, he saw a group of men gathered outside a house. One of them was a woman. She'd already reported the previous incidents to the police, but they hadn't caught the criminal, and now he'd struck again. But Jackson wasn't having it. She accused the Bobbies on the beat of doing nothing and told Maybrick that she wanted him to find the burglar herself. She told Maybrick that her bedroom window had been smashed and some jewelry stolen, and if they had, then they would likely try and seek medical attention without going to a hospital. And where would a working person go in the middle of the night? A chemist. Her name was Elizabeth Jackson, and she was understandably distressed. This is where things got a little awkward. You see, the man in the pub was sitting with a group of policemen. This clearly wasn't going to be easy, so Maybrick decided to take a different tactic. Instead of trying to find the burglar, he was going to find the person who hired him, Inspector John Gordon of the Lemon Street Police Station. To say they weren't happy to see him enter the pub would be an understatement. At first no one had, but then at a shop on Whitechapel High Street. The assistant told Maybrick that a man had come in earlier with a handkerchief pressed to a wound on his hand. One of them, PC John Neal, was a fingerprint expert and one of the very few men on the force who understood the value of forensic science. So each night, they would sit up to catch the culprit red-handed, but nobody ever saw anything. He was in Scotland Yard. When arrested, DiGiovanni tried to bribe the officers, but that didn't work. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and despite his protests of innocence, he was sent to trial at the Central Criminal Court. Unfortunately, the glass had been dropped and the print was incomplete, but that didn't matter. Thanks to the fact that most of London's criminals were wanted for more than one crime, Maybrick recognized the print instantly. Maybrick, who had given evidence in court, was congratulated by his superiors and given a commendation for his bravery. It belonged to a man called Frederick DiGiovanni. What we do know is that the case remained unsolved. The real burglar was never caught, and DiGiovanni served his full sentence. Claimed to be the son of Frederick DiGiovanni, and he told Wright that his father had confessed to him that he was the Whitechapel burglar. He also said that DiGiovanni had only been convicted for the crime to protect the real burglar, a member of the police force. Then, as Maybrick was leaving the station, he noticed a constable holding something up to the light. After all, it's just the word of a convicted burglar, but it does raise some questions. Could it be true that the real burglar was a police officer? Did Maybrick make a mistake, or was DiGiovanni protecting his accomplice? And to prove that his father was innocent, he showed Wright a letter DiGiovanni had written to his wife from prison. The threat of the burglar hung over the neighborhood like a bad smell, but the locals could at least sleep easy knowing that he was behind bars. Well, there are 2 possible answers to that question. The first is yes, and DiGiovanni was innocent, and Maybrick made an error that put an innocent man in prison. The second answer is no, and DiGiovanni was guilty. But in order to protect his own skin, he set up a fall guy. This time, she managed to get a good look at the burglar, and the description she gave the police didn't match that of the convicted burglar. It was a pane of glass, and on closer inspection, for the past few years, he'd been terrorizing London's wealthy, breaking into their homes and stealing whatever valuables he could get his hands on. But for some reason, he'd gone missing in recent months. Neal told Maybrick that he could see the partial imprint of a thumb. If he had lived longer, he would have seen the true story of his part in the Whitechapel burglary appear in print. Plus, Gordon was also a friend of his, so Maybrick was confident that he would listen to reason. So when a local resident reported their house had been robbed, it wasn't really considered a particularly pressing matter by the police. Maybrick thanked the chemist and rushed out to find the man. He chased him down Whitechapel High Street and into Dorset Street, where he finally spotted him disappearing into a pub, especially as the burglary was said to have taken place sometime during the night of the 13th or the 14th. So he took a look around the house and soon found a discarded pane of glass from the window. Not wanting to waste time, he got onto his penny farthing and started cycling around the neighborhood. And Maybrick was a big dude, 6'2" and over 10 stone. So riding a penny farthing wasn't exactly safe. But Maybrick didn't care. He loved that bike and he rode it everywhere. Even after being injured in an accident, leaving him with a stick to help him walk, he refused to stop patrolling on his beloved penny farthing. Nobody knew exactly when the break-in had happened because the resident hadn't actually caught the burglar red-handed. He was a night watchman, employed to patrol the streets and look out for any sign of trouble. His name was James Maybrick. He was about 50 years old and he was a bit of a legend in Whitechapel. It's because he patrolled his patch not on foot but on his bicycle. They just noticed that some cash and some jewelry were missing from the home. The thing was, it wasn't a one-off. Then one night, one man did see something. Now this was long before the invention of the safety bicycle, so we're talking penny farthings here. On the night of December, Maybrick was making his way through the slums when he heard the sound that every London policeman dreads, screams in the night. When Maybrick asked what had happened, she told him that her house had been robbed again. Maybrick tried to calm her down, telling her that the police would do everything they could to find the culprit. Now, normally a watchman wasn't a peace officer, so he didn't really have the authority to investigate crimes, but he wanted to help. He knew there was a small chance that whoever had smashed the window would have cut themselves on the broken glass. So Maybrick visited every chemist he could find, asking if anyone had come in with a cut or a wound. The man had looked around nervously, Maybrick was told, and after cleaning and bandaging the cut, he'd paid and left. Without wasting any more time, Maybrick pushed open the door and went inside. Maybrick was ushered out by two burly officers who, when they realized what he was after, told him in no uncertain terms that he should mind his own business. Gordon was in charge of the Whitechapel area, and Maybrick was under his command. As soon as Gordon heard what had happened, he snapped into action, sending several officers back to Jackson's house to search for clues. But even he couldn't find anything at the house. Maybrick felt a surge of excitement. Someone had been careless enough to leave their fingerprints at the scene. DeGiovanni was a known burglar with a taste for fine jewelry. As Maybrick stood there listening to Neil prattle on about the wonder of fingerprints, he realized that the burglar wasn't just in Whitechapel. Sure enough, when Maybrick and Gordon arrived at the address DeGiovanni was known to frequent, they found him hiding in the bedroom of a prostitute. And at the next available opportunity, he was brought before a magistrate and charged with the robbery. There he was found guilty and sentenced to 7 years penal servitude. After that, life more or less returned to normal in Whitechapel, or so everyone thought. Just 4 months after DeGiovanni's conviction, Elizabeth Jackson's house was robbed again. So was DeGiovanni innocent? Had Maybrick made a mistake? The truth is, we may never know what really happened. And as for James Maybrick, well, he continued to patrol the streets of London until 1882, when he died of a heart attack at the age of 63. In 1924, a man approached author Arnold Wright with a story. Giovanni's son claimed that Maybrick had made a mistake in identifying his father, and that as a result, an innocent man had been sent to prison. In the letter, DeGiovanni protested his innocence and claimed that he was being framed by someone close to the investigation, someone who wanted him out of the way so he wouldn't interfere with their own plans. Now, obviously this letter can't be taken as fact. I guess we may never know. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.